Nathan Hale had always believed that history revealed itself in whispers rather than thunder. Dust, fragments, corroded inscriptions. These were the voices he trusted. The excavation dome above Site K-47 filtered the sunlight into a pale amber haze, and the climate regulators hummed softly to keep the newly unearthed artifacts stable. To avoid contamination, everyone wore thin field gloves, though Nathan had a habit of tugging them halfway off whenever he became too absorbed in his work. He leaned over the analysis table, examining a collection of objects that had arrived that morning from a sealed subchamber. The artifacts were unmistakably Sanguir in origin, elongated geometric patterns, dark metallic alloys that drank in the light, and delicate filigree etched so precisely it seemed grown rather than carved. The Sanguir civilization fascinated him more than any other. They were ancient, scientifically advanced, and surrounded by persistent myths that refused to die, even in an age when starships crossed systems as routinely as aircraft once crossed oceans. "Careful with those," said Lena, the lab technician, from across the room. "Last time you handled Sanguir relics, you nearly triggered a stasis field." "That was one time," Nathan replied, "and technically, the field triggered itself. It froze your coffee in midair. It was an excellent demonstration of temporal containment." Lena shook her head and returned to her console, muttering something about archaeologists being the only people who could endanger themselves with jewelry. Nathan smiled faintly and turned his attention back to the velvet-lined tray before him. Resting in the center was a ring. It was larger than most human rings, crafted from a dark, mirror-smooth metal that seemed almost liquid in its reflections. A single gem, deep crimson, sat at its crest, glowing faintly as if lit from within. He picked it up with tweezers at first, rotating it under the scanner. The instrument displayed a cascade of readings: trace organic compounds, unknown crystalline structures, faint but measurable energy signatures. "Curious," Nathan murmured. He set the tweezers aside almost unconsciously and lifted the ring in his bare fingers. It felt warm, not hot, but distinctly warmer than the air around it. There was an inscription along the inner band, written in the flowing, angular script of the Sanguir language. Nathan began translating it silently, his mind assembling meanings from memory. The characters were formal, ceremonial, something about union, continuity. "Probably symbolic," he muttered. Without really thinking about it, he slipped the ring onto his finger. It fit perfectly. Nathan blinked, surprised. The sizing alone was remarkable. Sanguir physiology differed from humans in subtle ways, yet the ring settled against his skin as though it had been made for him. "Well," he said aloud to no one in particular, "that's statistically improbable." He tugged at it experimentally. The ring did not move. Nathan frowned and tried again, twisting this time. Still nothing. He reached for a bottle of solvent gel and applied a small amount around the band, then attempted to slide it off. The ring remained firmly in place, as immovable as if it had fused to his finger. "Lena," he called, trying to keep his voice casual, "hypothetically speaking, what would you recommend if someone were to, purely in the interest of research, place an artifact on their hand and find it reluctant to come off?" There was a pause. "You didn't." "I may have conducted a tactile analysis." Lena turned slowly in her chair, staring at him. "Nathan, it's not stuck," he said quickly. "It's temporarily adhering." He braced the ring against the edge of the table and pulled more firmly. It did not budge. "Temporarily," Lena repeated. Nathan sighed. "All right, it's stuck." Lena covered her face with one hand. For the next 10 minutes, the laboratory witnessed a sequence of increasingly undignified attempts to remove the ring. Cooling gel, thermal cycling, lubrication, and finally a rather creative method involving a length of diagnostic wire. All failed completely. At one point, Nathan nearly knocked over a spectrograph, which Lena caught just in time, giving him a look that suggested she was reconsidering her career choices. "This," Nathan said, slightly out of breath, "is unusual." "You think?" He examined the ring again, more carefully now. The crimson gem pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat. A faint vibration passed through the metal, so subtle he might have imagined it. Nathan felt a strange sensation then. Not pain, not even discomfort, but an awareness, as though the ring were no longer merely an object, but a presence. He shook his hand slightly, as if to clear the feeling. "All right," he said. "Let's check the inscription again." He returned to the translation display, focusing more carefully this time. The script was archaic, ceremonial, layered with metaphor and legal terminology. As the meaning resolved, his expression changed. Bond. Chosen. Sovereign. He read the line again, slower now, his stomach tightening slightly. "Lena," he said quietly, "how much do you know about Sanguir bonding customs?" "Only what everyone knows," she replied, "which is mostly rumors." Nathan swallowed. "Well," he said, staring at the glowing text, "I may have just participated in one." Lena stood up. "You're joking." "I sincerely wish I were." The air in the laboratory felt suddenly very still. Even the hum of the regulators seemed quieter, as though the room itself were listening. Nathan looked down at the ring again. The gem glowed steadily now, its deep crimson light reflecting in his eyes. "Well," he said after a long silence, forcing a faint nervous smile, "on the positive side, at least it's not cursed." The gem pulsed once, brighter than before. Nathan cleared his throat. "I hope." Nathan did not sleep that night, though he tried. The research quarters assigned to the excavation team were quiet, insulated from the constant hum of machinery in the main dome. But the silence only made the faint warmth around his finger more noticeable. The ring was still there, smooth and unmoving, as if it had always belonged to his hand. At some point around 3 in the morning, he sat up in bed, turned on the dim lamp beside him, and stared at it again. "Well," he murmured, "you are certainly persistent." The ring naturally offered no reply, though the gem held its faint inner glow, steady as a heartbeat. Nathan sighed and leaned back against the wall, rubbing his face. He had sent the inscription translation to 3 xenocultural specialists, 2 legal historians, and 1 very confused linguistics professor who had replied with a single message. "Are you absolutely sure you didn't mistranslate this?" Nathan was absolutely sure. By morning, the laboratory was unusually busy. Word had spread, not officially, but in the way such things always did, carried by whispers, raised eyebrows, and the unmistakable sight of Nathan walking in with a glowing crimson ring firmly attached to his hand. Lena handed him a cup of coffee. "You're famous," she said. "I was hoping for a quieter path to recognition," Nathan replied. "Have you tried sawing your finger off?" "I'm an archaeologist, not a dramatist." "That's debatable," Lena said. Nathan sipped the coffee and winced. It was far too strong, but he drank it anyway, grateful for the distraction. At the far end of the lab, a portable translation console chimed. Nathan crossed the room and activated the display. One of the specialists had sent a full analysis of the inscription. He read it once, then again. Then he exhaled slowly and leaned against the console. "Well," Lena said, watching his expression, "how bad is it?" Nathan hesitated. "Do you want the short version or the detailed, terrifying version?" "Short. I'm engaged." Lena blinked. "Excuse me?" "Engaged," Nathan repeated. "Formally, legally, possibly metaphysically." "To whom?" Nathan turned the screen so she could see the translated title. Lena read it aloud, very slowly. "Queen Syvanna, sovereign of the Sanguir court." There was a long silence. "Well," Lena said at last, "on the positive side, she's probably very distinguished." Nathan laughed, though it came out a little strained. Before he could reply, the lights in the laboratory flickered. At first it was subtle, just a dimming, like a passing cloud crossing the sun. Then the air itself began to shimmer, as though heat waves were rising from an invisible fire. Instruments chirped in confusion, sensors registering energy fluctuations that had no identifiable source. Nathan straightened, every instinct sharpening. "Is that normal?" Lena asked. "No," Nathan said quietly. The shimmering intensified, gathering in the center of the room. Light bent inward, folding in on itself, forming a distortion that deepened, darkened, and then collapsed into a single point. A figure stood where the distortion had been. She was tall, slender, and very still. Her skin was pale, almost luminous, and her dark hair fell in smooth waves over her shoulders. Her ears were long and elegantly pointed, unmistakably Sanguir. She wore garments of deep crimson and black, woven from materials Nathan could not immediately identify, their surfaces shifting subtly like liquid shadow. Her eyes moved across the room, calm, observant, ancient. Nathan felt quite suddenly that he should probably say something intelligent. "Good morning," he said. Lena made a small choking sound behind him. The woman's gaze settled on Nathan, and then on the ring. For a moment her expression did not change. Then very slowly her eyebrows lifted. "You are wearing it," she said. Her voice was soft, controlled, carrying an undertone of quiet authority. "Yes," Nathan said. "That appears to be the case." There was a pause. "I am Syvanna," she said. "I gathered," Nathan replied, then immediately wished he had chosen a more diplomatic response. To his surprise, the faintest hint of amusement touched her expression. "I was informed," she said, "that the ring had activated. I expected another attempt, a hopeful noble perhaps, or an ambitious diplomat." Her gaze returned to his face, studying him carefully. Not an archaeologist with ink on his fingers. Nathan glanced at his hand and sighed. Occupational hazard. Silence settled again, not tense, but charged with the weight of the moment. Syvanna stepped closer, her movements smooth and deliberate. She examined the ring, then looked into Nathan's eyes as though searching for something deeper than surface impressions. "The ring does not choose lightly," she said at last. "I assure you," Nathan said, "I did not choose it at all." A faint smile touched her lips. "Yes," she said, "that much is clear." Lena, who had been very carefully pretending to organize data crystals, finally spoke. "Is there any way to remove it?" Syvanna turned her gaze toward her. "Yes," she said, "there is." Nathan felt a surge of relief. "It requires," Syvanna continued, "mutual agreement to dissolve the bond. According to Sanguir law, such agreement can only be made after a formal period of acquaintance." Nathan's relief faded. "How long?" he asked carefully. "Is that period?" Syvanna considered. "Traditionally, several weeks." Nathan closed his eyes briefly. "Well," he said, "that's inconvenient." Syvanna tilted her head slightly. "You do not seem frightened." "I've spent 15 years studying Sanguir culture," Nathan replied. "You're not monsters. You're people." He hesitated, then added, "Very impressive. Long-lived people with excellent jewelry, but still people." For the first time, Syvanna laughed, a quiet, genuine sound that seemed to lighten the air itself. "I believe," she said, "this courtship period may be interesting." Nathan looked at the ring again, then back at her. "Yes," he said, "I suspect it will." The transport vessel that carried Nathan to the Sanguir orbital court moved so smoothly he could barely feel the acceleration. Through the viewing panel, the excavation world receded into a hazy sphere, its deserts and silver domes fading into the darkness of space. Nathan sat in the passenger compartment, staring at his reflection in the glass. The ring glowed faintly, steady and patient, as if it had all the time in the universe. Syvanna stood a few steps away, speaking quietly with one of her attendants in a language that flowed like music, its rhythm unfamiliar but strangely calming. Nathan tried not to stare, though he occasionally failed. It was not merely her appearance that held his attention, but the sense of age she carried. Not frailty, but depth, like an ancient ocean. After a while, she turned toward him. "You are unusually calm," she said. Nathan shrugged. "I've always wanted to visit an alien royal court. I just didn't expect the invitation to be legally binding." The corner of her mouth lifted slightly. The vessel entered the docking field of the orbital court, and Nathan leaned closer to the window. The structure ahead was immense, far larger than he had imagined. It resembled a vast, luminous ring suspended above a crimson planet, its surface threaded with flowing lines of light that shifted slowly, like currents in a living organism. "That," Nathan said quietly, "is extraordinary." "It is home," Syvanna replied. The docking sequence was almost silent. When the airlock opened, a corridor stretched before them, its walls translucent and softly glowing, as though carved from frozen light. The air carried a faint, metallic sweetness Nathan could not quite place. As they walked, Nathan became aware of eyes watching them. Sanguir attendants moved along the corridors, their long ears and pale features giving them an otherworldly grace. Some bowed to Syvanna, others glanced curiously at Nathan, their gazes lingering on the ring. "I feel," Nathan murmured, "like I'm being examined by a panel of very elegant scientists." "You are," Syvanna said. "That's reassuring." She glanced at him, and for a moment her expression softened, as though she were still adjusting to his humor, still deciding how seriously to take it. They entered a vast chamber, open to a panoramic view of the planet below. The surface glowed in shades of deep red and violet, vast cloud systems swirling slowly across its atmosphere. Nathan stepped closer to the transparent barrier, mesmerized. "It looks alive," he said. "In many ways it is," Syvanna replied. He turned back toward her. "Do you ever get used to a view like that?" She followed his gaze to the planet. "No," she said quietly, "and I hope I never do." A group of officials approached, their movements formal and measured. They greeted Syvanna with respectful bows, then turned their attention to Nathan. The scrutiny was immediate and unmistakable. One of them, an older Sanguir with silver-threaded hair, spoke. "This is the one?" Syvanna inclined her head. "Yes." The official studied Nathan carefully. "You are aware of the significance of the bond you carry?" "I am becoming increasingly aware," Nathan said. A faint ripple of amusement passed through the attendants, quickly suppressed. Formalities followed, introductions, protocols, explanations of customs Nathan struggled to remember. At one point he attempted to bow in the Sanguir fashion and nearly lost his balance, which caused a brief, scandalized silence, broken only when Syvanna quietly said, "Perhaps a simpler gesture will suffice." Nathan straightened, clearing his throat. "Yes, I agree." Later, after the officials departed, Syvanna led him through quieter corridors. The architecture shifted subtly as they walked, panels sliding and reconfiguring in response to their presence. "The structure is adaptive," she explained. "It reshapes itself according to need." Nathan blinked. "You live in a building that rearranges itself." "Yes. I lose my notes when I rearrange my desk." This time her laughter came more easily. They reached a balcony overlooking a vast interior garden, illuminated by soft, bioluminescent light. Plants unlike any Nathan had seen grew in graceful arcs, their leaves shimmering faintly as though dusted with starlight. A stream of clear liquid flowed through the garden, its surface glowing faintly blue. Nathan leaned on the railing, absorbing every detail. "I used to read about places like this," he said. "When I was a student, I never thought I'd actually stand in one." Syvanna studied him for a moment. "You see wonder," she said. "Most see only power." Nathan shrugged. "Power is less interesting than wonder." For a while they stood in silence, listening to the faint sound of the glowing stream. "Does it trouble you?" she asked at last. "To be here, bound to someone you did not choose?" Nathan considered the question carefully. "Yes," he said, "and no." She waited. "It troubles me," he continued, "because I value choice. But it doesn't trouble me because I don't feel trapped. Not yet." He glanced at her, then added, "That probably depends on how terrible you turn out to be." Syvanna raised an eyebrow. "And what is your assessment so far?" Nathan pretended to think. "Undetermined. Preliminary observations are promising." She shook her head slightly, though her eyes held warmth. Far below, lightning flickered in the crimson clouds of the planet, silent and distant. Nathan watched it, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over him. The situation was absurd, impossible, and entirely beyond anything he had ever imagined. And yet, standing there beside Syvanna, it did not feel frightening. It felt like the beginning of something he did not yet understand. Nathan quickly discovered that life inside the Sanguir orbital court followed rhythms very different from anything he had known on Earth. Time itself felt altered there, not physically, but psychologically. The absence of sunrise and sunset, replaced by gradual shifts in ambient light, made days seem to stretch and fold into one another. On his third morning, he thought it was morning at least, he woke to find that the wall of his chamber had become transparent, revealing a wide view of the crimson planet below. He sat up slowly, blinking, still adjusting to the quiet elegance of the place. "I assume this isn't a malfunction," he muttered to himself. A soft chime answered him, and a calm voice spoke from somewhere in the room. "The chamber responds to circadian patterns and cognitive activity. You appeared to be waking." Nathan rubbed his eyes. "Of course it does." He stood, stretched, and immediately walked into a section of the floor that adjusted its firmness to match his step, nearly causing him to lose balance. "All right," he said to the room. "I appreciate the assistance, but I would also appreciate a little less enthusiasm." Later that day, Syvanna met him in one of the upper galleries, a long, open corridor lined with flowing crystalline structures that emitted soft, silvery light. She was dressed more simply than before, in layered garments of pale gray that moved like mist as she walked. "You are adjusting," she observed. "I am negotiating with the architecture," Nathan replied. "We have reached a fragile truce." She gave him a faintly amused look and gestured for him to walk with her. They passed through a series of chambers where scholars studied ancient records. Their displays formed of floating light rather than solid screens. Nathan slowed frequently, drawn to the symbols and diagrams drifting in midair. "You may examine them," Syvanna said. "Are you sure?" Nathan asked. "I have a reputation for touching things I shouldn't." "I am aware." He grinned and stepped closer to one of the displays, studying a rotating projection of a Sanguir starship design that looked more like a living organism than a machine. "The hull is grown, not manufactured," he said half to himself. "Yes," Syvanna replied. "It adapts to damage and environmental stress." Nathan shook his head in admiration. "You grow your ships. We weld ours together and hope they don't explode." "That seems inefficient." "It builds character." They continued walking until they reached a wide chamber, open to a garden suspended within a transparent sphere. Inside, tall, delicate plants floated freely in the air, their roots trailing like threads of glass. Small, luminous creatures drifted among them, pulsing gently with light. Nathan stopped in the doorway, staring. "Are those—" He hesitated. "Are those animals or plants?" "Yes," Syvanna said. Nathan blinked. "That is the least helpful answer I've ever received." She smiled faintly. They stepped into the sphere, and Nathan felt the subtle shift of artificial gravity adjusting to maintain balance, while allowing the plants to remain suspended. One of the glowing creatures drifted close to him, its translucent body shimmering in soft colors. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "It is harmless," Syvanna replied. "You may touch it." Nathan extended a finger cautiously. The creature brushed against his skin, leaving behind a faint warmth that faded almost immediately. "It feels like warm air," he said. "It feeds on ambient electromagnetic energy," she explained. "The warmth is a byproduct." Nathan looked at the creature as it drifted away. "I used to think the universe would feel cold," he said, "but it doesn't." Syvanna regarded him thoughtfully. "No," she said, "it does not." They sat on a curved bench grown from the living structure of the sphere. For a while neither spoke, watching the slow, graceful motion of the floating garden. At last Nathan said, "May I ask you something?" "You may." "Why did the ring choose me?" Syvanna was silent for a moment. "The rings respond to resonance," she said. "Not merely biological compatibility, but alignment of temperament, of thought, of certain patterns we do not fully understand." Nathan considered that. "So somewhere in the universe, there's a cosmic equation that decided I was suitable." "Yes," he sighed. "I would very much like to see that equation." Her eyes glinted with amusement. They spoke for a long time after that, about history, about Earth, about the early expansion of humanity beyond its system. Nathan found himself telling stories he had not thought about in years. His first excavation, the professor who had once fallen asleep in a storage crate, the time an entire research team had spent 3 days analyzing what turned out to be an ornamental doorstop. Syvanna listened, occasionally asking quiet questions, occasionally laughing in that soft, unguarded way that seemed to surprise even her. As the artificial daylight in the sphere began to dim, Nathan realized something that unsettled him slightly. He was no longer thinking about how to remove the ring. The thought came to him quietly, like a realization glimpsed from the corner of his mind. He looked at his hand, at the dark metal band resting against his skin. For the first time, it did not feel like a restraint. It felt familiar. Nathan exhaled slowly and leaned back, watching the luminous creatures drift through the fading light, and wondered when exactly the impossible had begun to feel so natural. Nathan began to notice that the Sanguir court never truly slept. The lighting dimmed, activity slowed, and the great corridors grew quieter. But there was always movement somewhere. Scholars working in distant halls, navigators adjusting orbital trajectories, attendants tending to systems that hummed with a quiet, living energy. The court felt less like a palace and more like a vast organism that simply breathed more slowly at night. One evening, if it was evening, Nathan had stopped trusting his sense of time. He found himself in one of the observation chambers, studying a rotating holographic map of nearby star systems. The display responded to his gestures, expanding and shifting as he traced possible travel routes, lost in the familiar comfort of analysis and speculation. "You appear to be planning an expedition," Syvanna said behind him. Nathan turned, smiling faintly. "Occupational reflex. Give me a map and I start wondering what's buried in all the empty places." She stepped beside him, studying the map. "There is rarely emptiness," she said. "Only distances not yet crossed." "That's a better way of putting it," Nathan admitted. They stood there for a while, watching the slow movement of stars across the projection. "You are more at ease here," Syvanna said at last. Nathan considered that. "Yes," he said, "which is slightly alarming." "Why alarming?" "Because I expected to spend this entire time looking for ways to escape. And now?" Nathan glanced at the ring, then back at the drifting stars. "Now I keep forgetting to try." Syvanna did not reply, but her expression softened in a way that suggested she understood more than she said. Later, she led him to a smaller chamber connected to the main gardens. A table had been prepared there, set with delicate crystalline vessels and dishes containing unfamiliar foods. Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Is this dinner?" "A meal," Syvanna said. "I was told that humans consider shared meals important." "They do," Nathan said, taking a seat, "although usually with fewer glowing elements." One of the dishes emitted a faint blue light, and Nathan leaned closer, examining it carefully. "Is it safe?" he asked. "Yes." "Has anyone tested that on humans?" Syvanna hesitated. "Not extensively." Nathan sat back. "I will start with the least luminous option." She laughed softly as he selected a small portion of something that resembled thin slices of fruit. The taste was surprisingly mild, with a faint sweetness and a cool aftertaste. "That's actually very good," he said, sounding mildly surprised. "I am relieved," Syvanna replied. They ate slowly, the conversation drifting between light topics and deeper ones. Nathan told her about Earth's oceans, about storms that could stretch for thousands of kilometers, about the strange beauty of bioluminescent tides. Syvanna spoke of her world's long winters, of cities carved into crystal cliffs, of nights lit by 3 small moons. At one point, Nathan attempted to pour a drink from one of the crystalline vessels and discovered that the liquid inside altered its density in response to movement, forming a slow, floating spiral instead of flowing normally. He stared at it for several seconds. "I believe," he said carefully, "that your beverages are defying gravity." "They are designed to enhance aroma," Syvanna said. Nathan tilted the vessel experimentally, watching the spiral shift. "I'm afraid to drink it. It looks like it might become self-aware." "It will not," she said, though her eyes held quiet amusement. "Are you certain?" "I am reasonably certain." "That is not entirely reassuring." They both laughed, the sound echoing softly through the chamber. As the meal ended, the conversation grew quieter. Outside the transparent wall, the crimson planet turned slowly, its cloud systems glowing faintly in reflected starlight. "May I ask you something?" Syvanna said after a while. Of course. You study civilization, she said. You observe them, learn their patterns, and then you leave. Does that not feel lonely? Nathan was silent for a moment. Sometimes, he admitted, but there's also a kind of freedom in it. You're always moving, always discovering. You don't stay long enough in one place to feel the weight of time. And yet, she said quietly, time finds you regardless. Nathan looked at her then, really looked, and saw the centuries in her eyes, not as a burden alone, but as something vast and immeasurable, like a deep ocean whose surface only hinted at what lay beneath. Yes, he said softly. I suppose it does. They sat in silence after that, not uncomfortable, simply thoughtful. At length Nathan stood and walked to the window, resting his hand lightly against the transparent surface. When I was younger, he said, I used to imagine what it would be like to meet someone from another world. I thought it would feel strange, alien in the truest sense. And does it? Syvanna asked. Nathan shook his head slightly. No, he said. It feels, surprisingly ordinary. Syvanna stepped beside him, looking out at the stars. Yes, she said quietly. It does. The silence that followed was not empty, but full of unspoken understanding. Nathan glanced at the ring again, noticing how naturally it rested on his hand now, how he no longer felt its weight. He realized with a faint sense of wonder that the strangeness of his situation had not vanished. He had simply grown accustomed to it, and somewhere in that realization was a quiet, undeniable truth beginning to take shape, though he was not yet ready to name it. Nathan began to notice the change gradually, in the way conversations paused when he entered certain chambers, in the way some of the court officials watched him not with curiosity, but with calculation. It was subtle, almost polite, but unmistakable. One afternoon, while examining a display of ancient navigational instruments, he became aware that two Sanguir nobles were speaking nearby in low voices. They were not speaking loudly enough to be openly rude, but not quietly enough to avoid being overheard. An accident, one of them was saying. Surely the Queen will dissolve the bond once the formalities are complete. And if she does not, the other asked. A pause followed. Then the court will have concerns. Nathan pretended to remain absorbed in the instruments, though the words settled heavily in his thoughts. Later, Syvanna found him in the upper observatory, staring out at the stars with unusual stillness. You are troubled, she said. Nathan exhaled slowly. I am observant. She studied him for a moment. You heard them. Yes. And what did you feel? Nathan considered the question carefully. Not anger, he said at last. More like understanding. If I were in their position, I would probably be suspicious too. A random human appears and suddenly stands at the center of their queen's future. It sounds like the beginning of a very bad political drama. A faint smile touched her lips. You have a talent for understatement. They stood together in silence, watching a distant transport ship drift across the starfield. The court is cautious, Syvanna said quietly. Caution has preserved our people for centuries. I don't blame them, Nathan replied. I don't entirely trust the situation myself. She turned to him. You do not trust me? Nathan shook his head quickly. No, I trust you. I just don't trust the universe's sense of humor. For a moment she looked puzzled, then she laughed softly, the tension easing between them. A few days later, Nathan was invited, summoned, really, to attend a formal debate in one of the council chambers. He arrived to find a semicircle of Sanguir officials waiting, their expressions composed but intent. One of them, a tall figure with pale silver eyes, addressed him directly. You are aware that the bond you carry has implications beyond your personal experience. Yes, Nathan said. I am painfully aware. Then you understand that we must determine whether you possess the qualities required of a consort to the Queen. Nathan blinked. I wasn't aware there would be an examination. There is always an examination, the official replied. The debate that followed was not hostile, but it was rigorous. They questioned him about history, ethics, diplomacy, and the responsibilities of leadership. Nathan answered honestly, sometimes carefully, sometimes with dry humor, that caused a few of the younger attendants to struggle not to smile. At one point, an official asked, "What is the most important quality in a ruler?" Nathan thought for a moment. "The ability to admit they might be wrong," he said. A quiet murmur passed through the chamber. "And why?" the official pressed. "Do you believe that?" "Because," Nathan replied, "a ruler who cannot admit error will repeat it, and repetition in history tends to be expensive." The murmurs grew louder, not disapproving, but thoughtful. When the session ended, Nathan stepped out into the corridor, feeling more exhausted than he expected. Syvanna was waiting there. "Well?" she asked. "I believe I have just defended my qualifications for a job I never applied for," Nathan said. "And how do you think you performed?" "I didn't faint," he replied. "I consider that a success." She laughed, and the sound seemed to dissolve the lingering tension of the day. That evening, they walked together along one of the outer promenades, where the transparent walls revealed a sweeping view of the crimson planet below. Storm systems moved slowly across its surface, vast and silent. "I have lived a long time," Syvanna said after a while. "Long enough to see alliances formed for convenience, for ambition, for fear, but rarely for understanding." Nathan rested his hands on the railing. "Understanding takes time," he said, "and most people are in too much of a hurry." She looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "You are not in a hurry." Nathan smiled faintly. "I spent 3 years excavating a single ruin once. Patience is practically a professional requirement." A faint glow from the ring caught his attention. It was warmer than usual, the gem pulsing gently. "Does it ever do that for no reason?" he asked. "No," Syvanna said softly. They stood there watching the distant lightning flicker in the clouds below. Nathan felt a quiet certainty settling in his thoughts. Not dramatic or overwhelming, but steady and undeniable. The court's doubts, the strangeness of the bond, the impossibility of the situation, none of it felt as heavy as it once had. He realized with a slight sense of surprise that he was no longer thinking about when he would leave. He was thinking about what might happen if he stayed. The final day of the courtship period arrived without ceremony. There were no bells, no proclamations, no visible change in the steady rhythm of life within the orbital court. Yet Nathan felt the difference the moment he woke. The air itself seemed quieter, as if waiting. He sat at the edge of the bed, turning the ring slowly around his finger. It no longer felt foreign. He could barely remember what his hand had felt like without it. For several minutes he remained there, thinking. Not about escape routes or legal clauses or the improbable chain of events that had brought him here, but about conversations in gardens filled with drifting light, about laughter echoing in long corridors, about the calm presence of someone who had lived 3 centuries, yet still found wonder in small things. At last he stood. Syvanna was waiting for him in the observatory. The vast chamber was nearly empty, the stars beyond the transparent walls stretching endlessly in every direction. "So," Nathan said quietly, "this is the day." "Yes," she replied. For a while neither of them spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable, but full, like the pause between the final notes of a piece of music. "The council will ask for our decision," Syvanna said at last. "If we choose to dissolve the bond, the ring will release you." Nathan nodded. "And if we do not," she continued, "the bond will become permanent." Nathan looked down at his hand, then back at her. "When I first put this on," he said, "I thought my life had been interrupted. And now?" He smiled faintly. "Now I think it may have begun." Syvanna studied him carefully as though weighing the sincerity of his words. "You would remain?" she asked. "I would," Nathan said simply. For a moment, the centuries in her eyes seemed to soften, like ice melting under sunlight. "I would also remain," she said. The ring grew warm, the crimson gem glowing softly, its light steady and gentle, as if acknowledging their choice. Later they stood before the council in the great chamber, where the flowing architecture rose in sweeping arcs of crystal and living metal. The assembled officials watched in silence as Syvanna spoke. "The bond will not be dissolved," she said. A quiet murmur passed through the chamber. Not outrage, not even surprise, but the sound of expectations shifting. Nathan felt many eyes on him, measuring, evaluating, perhaps still uncertain. But he felt no fear. One of the older counselors stepped forward. "Then it is decided," the counselor said. "The bond is recognized." The formal words echoed softly, sealing the choice. When the assembly ended, Nathan and Syvanna walked together along one of the outer promenades. The crimson planet below turned slowly, its clouds glowing in the light of distant stars. "I suspect," Nathan said, "that some of them are still not entirely convinced about me." "That will change," Syvanna replied. "How?" She glanced at him. "You will continue to be yourself." Nathan laughed. "That is either very reassuring or deeply alarming." "Perhaps both," she said. They walked in silence for a while. "You have changed," she said at last. Nathan considered that. "Yes," he admitted. "I think I have." "How?" He rested his hands on the railing, looking out at the endless expanse of space. "I used to think of the universe as something to study," he said. "Something to observe from a distance, to measure and analyze. But now," he paused, searching for the right words. "Now it feels personal." Syvanna nodded as if she understood completely. Far below, lightning flickered in the planet's atmosphere, silent and distant, like the slow pulse of a living world. Nathan watched it, feeling a quiet certainty settle within him. The fear he had felt in those first moments, the sense of being trapped by forces beyond his control, had faded. In its place was something steadier, acceptance, and perhaps even gratitude. After a while, he said, "You know, I still can't believe this all started because I absent-mindedly tried on a ring." Syvanna's lips curved in a small smile. "History often turns on smaller moments than we expect." "Yes," Nathan said, "though I suspect most archaeologists don't end up accidentally engaged to a queen. You may be unique in that regard." "I always hope to be memorable," he said. They both laughed, the sound carrying softly into the vastness of the promenade. The stars burned steadily above them, cold and distant, yet no longer empty. Nathan looked at the ring once more, then at the endless sky, and felt a sense of peace deeper than anything he had known before. Not the quiet of solitude, but the quiet of belonging. And for the first time in his life, the future did not feel like an uncertain horizon to be studied from afar. It felt like a path he was ready to walk, step by step, beside someone who no longer felt like a stranger at all.